A cargo ship hit a tanker carrying jet fuel for the US military off of eastern England, setting both vessels ablaze.
Călin Georgescu supporters clashed with police after Romania's electoral committee barred the far-right candidate from running in Sunday's presidential election.
Syria announces the end of a days-long military operation against al-Assad loyalist fighters on Monday.
A cargo ship hit a tanker carrying jet fuel for the US military off of eastern England, setting both vessels ablaze and sending fuel pouring into the North Sea. The ship's owner said one crew member was missing hours later, but that 37 others from both ships were safe and accounted for. The collision triggered a major rescue operation by lifeboats, Coast Guard aircraft and commercial vehicles.
There should be a lot of electronics on both ships preventing it or giving you notice of what's going to happen. And there should also be crew on both ships watching the electronics, preventing it should happen. In somewhere down that chain, one of them's failed. Poor visibility watches have always been standard practice on merchant ships.
Local authorities said it appeared the crew of the cargo ship hadn't been maintaining a proper lookout as required by international maritime regulations. Scientists said the environmental impact might be less severe than with a spill of heavier crude oil.
Romania's Central Electoral Committee has suspended the application by ultranationalist presidential candidate Călin Georgescu to run in the upcoming elections on Sunday. The suspension sparked condemnation and triggered protests in the capital, Bucharest. Georgescu supporters clashed with police in front of the committee's headquarters. One gendarme was injured in the scuffles. The committee examined documents filed by Georgescu but did not approve one related to his campaign funding, noting that it was missing a required signature. The far-right candidate slammed the decision, calling it a direct blow to the heart of democracy before labeling Europe as a dictatorship. One of his advisors announced on Monday that he will challenge the election authority. The Constitutional Court should rule on Georgescu's appeal by Wednesday. The committee defended its decision in a 3-page document and accused Georgescu of not displaying values the presidential office requires. Georgescu, dubbed the TikTok Messiah, came out on top in the first round of Romania's presidential elections in December. The Constitutional Court annulled the vote following the declassification of intelligence reports showing Russian meddling in influencing voters.
Former independent presidential candidate Călin Georgescu has appealed the electoral authorities' decision to ban him from running again to Romania's Constitutional Court. Now, this is an effort his political allies don't necessarily seem to be putting much hope behind, keeping in mind recent statements made by these leaders. But what we are seeing in the meantime is more protests right here in front of the Constitutional Court's headquarters. In the meantime, we are also seeing multiple police investigations being opened. On the one hand, one is centered around the main opposition party's leader, George Simion, and that is for a post he made on social media allegedly inciting the masses to cause violent incidents. Now, there are also investigations around the violent protests that took place last night, especially investigations regarding charges of destruction of property and assaulting riot police officers. But it is important to note that as of now, not one person has been detained, though police say that they are making efforts in identifying all those involved in the violent protests.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte promised full support for Bosnia and Herzegovina as tensions rise over Bosnian Serb separatist moves. The latest crisis began when Bosnian Serb lawmakers passed laws blocking Bosnia's central judiciary and police from operating in Republika Srpska, the Serb-majority region that makes up about half of Bosnia. Speaking from Sarajevo, Rutte reacted.
NATO remains firmly committed to the stability of this region and to the security of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I have three main messages to deliver today, but one is really the main message. First, our commitment to Bosnia and Herzegovina is steadfast.
This move happened after Milorad Dodik, the pro-Russia leader of Republika Srpska, was sentenced to a year in prison and banned from office for 6 years for defying Bosnia's top international peace envoy.
Russia announced on Monday that it was expelling 2 British diplomats stationed at the embassy in Moscow, accusing them of espionage. The Federal Security Service, FSB, claimed in a statement that the diplomats had submitted false personal details when applying for entry into Russia and were involved in alleged intelligence and subversive activities that posed a threat to national security. However, no evidence was provided to support these claims. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, diplomatic expulsions between Moscow and Western nations have become increasingly frequent. Last month, London expelled a Russian diplomat in retaliation for an expulsion in November.
Syria's new government announced the end of a days-long military operation against fighters loyal to overthrown President Bashar al-Assad on Monday. On Sunday, Syrian activists had gathered in Damascus to call for peace and an end to the killing of civilians. But war monitor, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, reported violent clashes with gunmen associated to the Ministry of Defense. The initial surge of violence came after a surprise attack by gunmen from the Alawite community on the police patrol, kicking off widespread fighting across Syria's coastal region on Thursday. According to war monitors, at least 1,130 people have been killed in the clashes, including 830 civilians. On Monday, the European Union condemned these attacks, demanding for the perpetrators to be brought to justice. While on Sunday, the US called for the perpetrators of these massacres to be held accountable.
A one-day strike by workers at 13 German airports caused the cancellation of most flights on Monday. Public sector employees at the airports, as well as ground and security staff, organized a 24-hour walkout as part of an ongoing dispute over wages and working conditions. The German Airports Association said more than 3,400 flights were expected to be cancelled throughout the country. The Frankfurt and Berlin airports said all departures and arrivals on Monday are affected by the strike.
Wütend, ich verstehe schon, wenn der Streik, also was die wollen und für was sie sich einsetzen. Aber es ist schon, wenn man auf den Flug angewiesen ist, so weit, ja, und man muss alles in die Wege leiten, das ist schon schwierig.
The Service Workers Union announced the strike on Friday, but added a short notice walkout on Sunday at Hamburg Airport, arguing that it must ensure the measure was effective. A common tactic in German wage negotiations, the so-called warning strike related to 2 separate pay disputes. Negotiations on a new pay and conditions contract for airport security workers and a wider dispute over pay for employees of federal and municipal governments.
Former central banker Mark Carney will become Canada's next Prime Minister after the ruling Liberal Party elected him as their new leader. And in his first speech, he was quick to take a defiant stance against threats from U.S. President Donald Trump.
There's someone who's trying to weaken our economy. Donald Trump, as we know, has put, as the Prime Minister just said, unjustified tariffs on what we build, on what we sell, on how we make a living. He's attacking Canadian families, workers and businesses, and we cannot let him succeed.
Immediately addressing one of Canadians' most pressing concerns, Carney said his government will continue fighting Trump.
The Canadian government has rightly retaliated and is rightly retaliating with our own tariffs that will have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here in Canada. And my government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
In first place, the next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney.
Carney was the former governor of Canada's central bank and is widely credited with helping orchestrate the country's fast recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. In 2013, he was appointed as governor of the Bank of England, becoming the first non-citizen to do so since its founding. More recently, he served as the United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Change and Finance. Carney will succeed Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister in the coming days after he's sworn in. The Harvard-educated economist with Wall Street experience may not keep the job for long. He's expected to trigger a snap election shortly. Opposition parties could also force one with a no-confidence vote later this month.
Greenland is preparing to hold general elections on Tuesday, March 11, amid renewed geopolitical tensions over the Arctic island. The election campaign is expected to revolve around the island's independence aspirations and relations with Denmark and the US, and the polls are projected to reshuffle the country's parliament. US President Donald Trump's interest in purchasing the island has spurred Denmark to accelerate efforts to mend the fractured ties. Greenland is the world's biggest island with around 60,000 people. The island, a former colony of Denmark, became a formal territory of the Nordic Kingdom in 1953 and is subject to the Danish constitution. If the island became independent, it could choose to become associated with the US without becoming US territory. When Trump offered to buy Greenland in 2019, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen rejected the idea and called it absurd.